Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. This morning, I will be chairing the hearing. My name is Robert Hutchings. Joining me on the panel is Robert Belenke and Carrie Linklater. Our secretary today is Jason Robertson, and our assessor representing the assessment department, City of Winnipeg, is Mr. Pontanilla. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into this meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg Vision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions, please note the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if their matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with this board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questioning. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decisions by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7 on our docket today. Mr. Robertson, please affirm the assessor and the applicant's testimony.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Roddy Pontanilla.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
It's David Nishi Beckingham.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I so affirm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning to both parties. First property up on the docket is item number 1, file number 22-3767. Address is 51 Rangers Drive, dealing with a 2023 realty assessment. Excuse me. I'm getting noise coming from somewhere. Is it
possible? Yeah. If you can just mute yourselves till. Fantastic.
Okay. Thank you. Dealing with 51 Rangers Drive, and we have a preliminary issue on this property, I believe, Mr. Pontanilla, regarding a request for non-cooperation. So we'll start with you presenting your brief with the details of the property, and then we'll deal with the non-cooperation first, please.
Okay, no problem. So as you stated, the file that's under review is 22-3767. The roll number is 0400-574-0100. The address is 51 Reindeers Drive. The 2023 assessed value had gone out at $2,632,000. And as you mentioned, we do have a preliminary issue to deal with in the non-cooperation, having not received an income and expense mailer for 2020. So if I can direct your attention to page, just give me a second here, to page 13 of my brief. I can start there. So this is the UPS tracking document that we received from the United States Postal Services. It shows that the City of Winnipeg did send it to a address here in Orlando, Florida. So that document there does show the address there that we sent it to. The following document on page 14, I believe, is the delivery document from the United States Postal Services. So it shows us that the document was delivered to the Orlando, Florida address that we have on file. As well, if we go to page 17 of my brief, you'll note that we have the address at the top on the cover letter for the income and expense information that we had sent them. The address is to Orlando, Florida, and above that we have a tracking number, CH013-303-230CA. If we go back up to the parcel document scan that we have on page 13, you'll note that the United States Postal Service's tracking number is directly below the barcode. And that number, CH013-303-230CA, matches the tracking number that we have on the cover letter for the income and expense mailer. And then proceeding forward from that, I have included blank copies of the income and expense mailer as it would have been sent to the subject property. And that's the information I have on the preliminary issue.
Thank you, Mr. Pontanilla. Does the applicant have any comments or questions of the assessor?
I just question with regards to what penalties the assessor is requesting at this point for non-compliance.
Mr. Pontanilla?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I was just sorry, what penalty the assessor, I just trying to understand the penalty that the assessor is requesting from the board at this point.
Okay, so when we request a penalty for non-compliance, the assessed value that originally had gone out will stay for the first year of the assessment, but any adjustments will carry forward into the 2024 assessment year.
Okay. Thank you. There was some corporate change up with regards to our client here, and I believe Mark was dealing with Jennifer on getting the correct address where the income expense mailer should go to for future reference. That address is no longer their corporate address that deals with that. So the proper people didn't receive the notification, and it is certainly corrected in the future.
Okay. Could I ask, sir, if you're objecting to the application or the request, or you're agreeing with it?
I'll officially have to object to it and get a ruling from the board on it. That's all. That's fine. I'm not violently objecting to it. Okay. But I do understand the process there, and I have to object to it. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Does the assessor have any questions of the applicant's response there?
No questions.
Thank you. Carrie, any questions of the assessor? First, we'll start, I guess.
I have no questions for Mr. Pontanilla. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert, any questions?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Carrie, do you have any questions of the applicant regarding his response?
I just have one question. Mr. Beckingham, when did the change occur in address?
I'm not exactly sure when the address change occurred, but it's actually, I believe it's up in New York now, is where their head office is located. So there was a corporate change in the last 3 years. I'm not sure exactly when that occurred.
All right. Thank you. That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Carrie. Robert, any questions of the applicant?
No questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to take a recess and consider the evidence presented by both parties and rule on the request for non-compliance, okay? Thank you, Jason. I'll now call the hearing back to order. The panel has considered the evidence presented by both parties, and it is our opinion that the request for burden of proof for non-cooperation under section 53-3B be granted or allowed. So we're going to allow the request for non-cooperation, and to the applicant, part of that decision means that you will, the burden of proof is placed on you. So you will proceed first in this hearing.
I believe there was a recommended value that was coming forward on this property.
Is that right, Mr. Pontanilla?
Yes, that's correct. My colleague had some evaluation talks with the colleague of Mark who was working on the file, and I believe they had agreed to a value, and I'm going to just uphold the agreement that they had.
Okay. Okay. So the process we have here to the applicant is that in our decisions, we have to state the evidence presented by the applicant and the assessor in our decision. So to the applicant, I'm going to ask that you introduce your brief for the record and that you summarize the property details and the evidence that you presented forward. And then after we've dealt with that evidence presented, we will go back to the assessor and deal with the recommendation, okay? So bear with us 1 second here. We're going to pull up your brief.
There is no brief.
There is no brief.
There is no brief.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the problem was we thought we had an agreement on the value. It was just a matter of we had to argue on behalf of our client the issue of non-compliance was our only concern. We were in agreement with the value.
Okay. I'm still going to ask you for the record what you would have presented in a brief, whether it was an adjustment in income and expense statement, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah. It was after our analysis, it was an adjustment to the capitalization rate. We believe that there should be a 0.5 point adjustment in the capitalization rate, upward adjustment. And that came out to a new value of, I hope this is the correct value here, just give me a second. Of $2,440,000.
I'll just confirm 2,440,000.
2 million, yes, 440, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, thank you. Mr. Pontanillo, any questions? I'm just going to do this correctly of the applicant.
No, I have no questions.
Thank
our
you.
values might be slightly off, but it's very minuscule. It was almost on bullseye.
Okay. Robert, any questions of the applicant?
No questions.
Carrie, any questions?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Pontanillo, I'm going to find your brief here.
Sure. So if you can, if I can refer you back to my brief, if we can go to page. Sorry, I'm just scrolling up here. If we can go to page 9 of my brief, we can just go jump to the valuation stream, if that's okay with you guys.
Page 9. Okay. Yes.
So originally on the valuation, we had a 8,569 square feet of an A2 high quality restaurant at $22.42 per square foot. We do have model parameters in place. So we had a model vacancy of 6%, a model expense of 3%, and a shortfall of $8 per square foot, which brought us down to the modeled net operating income of $171,059. And we had applied a modeled cap rate of 6.5% to come out to a total value of $2,632,000. The adjustment, as the agent had alluded to, was a 0.5% cap rate adjustment. So for the adjustment, all the valuation parameters would stay the same, but the cap rate would have been increased, or would be increased, sorry, to 7%, which gives us a revised value of $2,444,000. So $2,444,000. And that was the recommendation that was put in place with my colleague and the one that I'm moving forward on this file.
Okay, does the applicant have any questions of the assessor?
No, just if I can get that number again, sorry.
$2,444,000. So $2,444,000.
Okay, yeah. Must have rounded something off when we did it here, so that's fine.
Okay, so sir, you are accepting that?
Yes.
Okay, you're in agreement. Okay, thank you. Robert, any questions of the assessor?
No questions for the assessor.
Thank you. Carrie, any questions?
Just one, Mr. Pontanilla, could you please repeat your revised NOI? I didn't hear it.
The NOI didn't change. The rental rate was still applied, so it was the same $22.42 per square foot. And the net operating income would have been the same as what was originally on the valuation at $171,059.
Okay,
So the adjustment was only to the cap rate at the very end of the valuation. Yeah,
great. Thank you very much.
welcome.
We were asked to turn the volume down, so I'm finding it a little hard to hear everyone, but.
Is that a little better?
You're quite quiet.
Yeah,
Am I louder now?
Try now.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
yeah.
I'm okay.
You're okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can. Okay. Is that better, Carrie?
Yeah, you're fine, Robert.
Oh, okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Pontanilla, just to confirm, the net operating income on your revised workup is still at $171,059. The only change is revising the cap rate from 6.5% to 7%, resulting in a recommendation at $2,444,000. And my understanding is that the applicant does accept that recommendation at that value.
That is correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any requirements for summary by either party?
No, I'm okay on my end.
I'm good on my end.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you, sir, for appearing. That concludes item number 151 Reinders Drive. Excuse me. And next item on the docket will be item number 2, file number 22-491, 4 St. Mary's Road. And we're dealing with a 2023 realty assessment. And we do have, Mr. Pontanilla, a preliminary issue. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, just bear with me 1 second here, and I'm going to get your docket up, or your brief up, pardon me.
The applicant will need to be sworn in as well.
Yes, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah, Jason, yeah, go ahead, please.
Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Wesley Van Bruggen.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Thank you.
Perfect.
Morning, Mr. Van Bregen.
Good morning.
Mr. Pontanilla, 4 St. Mary's Road, shall we deal with the non-compliance request first, please?
Sure. So if I'll begin my presentation, the file number is 22-491. The roll number is 0609-327-7300. The address is 4 St. Mary's Road. The 2023 assessed value had gone out at $2,998,000. And as you mentioned, we are seeking non-cooperation on this file. So if I can direct your attention to page 12 of my brief, I'll give you a minute to get there. On page 12, you'll find the document that we received from Canada Post. You'll note the tracking number at the top. You'll note that it was delivered and there was a signature received that the income and expense mailer was delivered to the name at the top there. As well, if we go to page 15 of my brief, you'll note that the address that we have for St. Mary's Road is the address that was used for the document where it was delivered. And we know that because if we look at the tracking number that we have over top of the address, LP 578-615-102CA, that tracking number is also the same at the top of the document that Canada Post had provided, LP 578-615-102CA. So we can confirm that the income expense mailer was delivered to the subject. And then following that, I have included the scanned documents of the original income and expense mailer that would have been sent at this time to the subject property. And that's my presentation on that.
Thank you, Mr. Pontanillo. Does the applicant have any questions of the assessor regarding the non-compliance request?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a couple quick questions. Thank you. So I guess the first question is, would you agree that this property is owner occupied?
My understanding of it is that it is.
Yeah. Okay. And then when looking at the value of the property, would you would agree that owner occupied properties typically wouldn't produce a rental rate for the property, correct?
I do think the questions are in relation to the non-compliance at the moment. I'd wonder if the chairman can just clarify that for us.
Yes, Mr. Van Bregen, we're dealing with the non-compliance only?
Right. The only reason I ask is in terms of the information being provided, I'm just questioning whether or not it would actually be used in any analysis. If any rent that's being provided would be non-arms and wouldn't be considered market, would any rental rates coming from the documentation provided be considered in a rental analysis?
There might be some questions, and if there's any declared rents that were being given, as it is owner occupied, but definitely any expense information would for sure be used in any analysis. As well, we do have legislation in place stating that the properties do have to provide their income and expense mailer information.
I think that concludes my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert, any questions of the assessor?
No questions of the assessor.
Thank you. Carrie, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Okay. Now, Mr. Van Bregen, any comments at all for us before we recess and consider the evidence presented?
No comments, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Jason, we're going to recess and consider the evidence on the non-compliance request. Thank you. Thanks, Jason. I'll now call the hearing back to order. The panel has considered the evidence presented by both parties, and it is our opinion that the request for burden of proof for non-cooperation be granted. So we're going to allow the request for non-compliance or non-cooperation under section 53.3. And Mr. Van Bregen, that will place the burden of proof on you. So you're going to proceed first in this hearing. So could you just wait for us until we get to your brief, please, before we proceed?
Certainly. Just let me know when you're ready, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. 4 St. Mary's Road. When you're ready, please, sir.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. If we can just turn to page 3, we'll get started. And just let me know when you're there.
Think we're good?
Thank you very much. As previously mentioned, this is the Santa Lucia Pizza located on St. Mary's. The property is 6,000, has been assessed at 6,534 square feet. It's a restaurant. It has been valued using the income approach to value. The building was constructed in 2010 and sits on a land parcel of 26,049 square feet. The property has been assessed at a value of $2,998,000. M&P is requesting a value of $2,340,700. If we can move to page 4. Page 4 is just the current assessment breakdown for this particular property, showing the income parameters which have been used. And if we can move to page 5. Page 5 is M&P's requested assessment for the property. So differences you'll note for this property, M&P is requesting a different rental rate. So the property has been assessed with a rental rate of $30.72. M&P is requesting a rental rate of $28. The vacancy rate is also different. The property has been assessed with a vacancy loss of 6%. M&P will be requesting a vacancy loss of 10%. And then finally, the capitalization rates. The property has been assessed with a capitalization rate of 6%. M&P will be requesting a capitalization rate of 6.6%. If the board can turn with me to page 7. Just let me know when you're there.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So here we have the property detail report provided by the City of Winnipeg, just outlining some general information about the property in regards to the property use code, as well as in terms of the assessed land area. The board will turn with me to the next page, page 8. On page 8, we have the assessment map. You can see it's an irregularly shaped property located along St. Mary's Road. And then page 9 provides a couple photos of the property itself. So you can see there's parking around the side of the property, in front, as well as in front of the property. Page 10 contains an overhead map of where of that particular property, where it's located. You can see it's located on St. Mary's there, right close to the bridge. The board turns with me to page 11. On page 11, we'll get started with our matters at hand. So as mentioned, there's three matters that we'll be discussing for this property. The first is the rental rate. As mentioned, the subject property has been assessed with a rental rate of $30.71 or 72 cents. When reviewing the Johnson report, M&P has determined that there has been a decline in the asking rental rates for restaurants. So here we provided a table showing what the asking rental rates for restaurants has been since 2017. You can see that between 2017, the rents kind of were fluctuated a little bit to 2018, but remaining fairly stable. The rents have asking restaurant rents increased from 2018 to 2019 and 2020, and then start declining. Part of that makes sense because, as we know, COVID hit. So we saw the pandemic hitting March 2020, which had a fairly significant impact on many restaurants, restricting service to only takeout. M&P has reviewed asking rents for restaurants and determined that similarly sized restaurants are leasing at rates ranging from $24 to $28 per square foot. We provided two examples here, for two leasing examples here. The first is 3318 Roblin Boulevard. Is 3,100 square feet in size. The asking rent was $24, and it was a semi-gross rent that was being asked. The second is 135 to 137 Osborne Street, 4,200 square feet, asking rent of $28 per square foot. Based on this information, it's M&P's position that an appropriate rental rate for the property would be $28 per square foot. If the board will flip with me to page 18, I apologize, we're going to bounce around just a little bit here. If the board can just let me know when you're there.
We are there, I believe, all of us.
Excellent. So on the bottom of page 18, you'll find the first rent comparable. This is 3318 Roblin Boulevard. So 3,100 square feet, $24 semi-gross lease. for asking. So this is an older building built in 1959, which is home to Pappas Greek Food and Steak for 20 years. This is great great exposure along Roblin and can hold 84 licensed restaurants, being able to hold 84 patrons. If the board turns with me to the next page, page 19. Page 19, if you look second from the bottom, you can see 135 to 137 Osborne Street. Property is 4,200 square feet. Asking rent is $28 per square foot.
Mr. Van Bringen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do not have the information. I have a blank page on my page 17, and then I have office leases on page 18. Am I?
Yeah, so if you look down on office leases, and if you look on the bottom, you should see 3318 Roblin Boulevard.
Okay, I see. I apologize.
Yeah,
Yes.
nope,
Okay,
my
thank you.
apologies. I should have been more clear. And
Okay.
as you can see that this is, so it's under the office leasing, but it is a restaurant. You can see licensed restaurant that indicated there. And then if you can just turn to the next page as well, it'll say retail leasing on the top. And then you should see second from the bottom, 135 to 137 Osborne Street.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. That should be 4,200 square feet, asking rent of $28. So you can see fully fixtured turnkey restaurant located within the heart of Osborne Village. So in terms of why we felt that this would be a reasonable rent comparable, it's kind of similar location to the property along St. Mary's. This in terms of the size is relatively similar as well. So when we take a look at it, we feel that it would be a reasonable comparable to determine when looking at a rental rate to be used for the property. If the board can turn back with me to page 12 when you get a moment. And let's give a moment to get there.
I think we're all there.
Excellent. So the second matter is in terms of the vacancy rate. As indicated previously, the property has been assessed with a vacancy rate of 6%. M&P has reported vacancy rates from the Johnson report and determined that just prior to the valuation date, restaurant vacancy rates had been increasing and were at 9.99% as of December 2020. Here we provided a table showing what the vacancy inventory as well as the vacancy is for restaurants. You can see that over the time frame from June 2017 to December 2020, the restaurant rates had remained relatively stable from June 2017 till June 2019. Starting in December of 2019, those rates started to increase, finalizing at a vacancy rate of 9.99% in December of 2020. Again, this isn't a huge surprise when we consider what the impact of COVID-19 has had, or the pandemic has had, on many restaurants. It's been a struggle, particularly for many of these restaurants, as they have limited their ability to do in-restaurant service, and in many times have been restricted to only takeout. So again, we have seen that increase in terms of that vacancy rate over that time frame. So based on these parameters, again, in the M&P's position that a vacancy rate of 9.99 or 10% would be appropriate to be used for the property. For the board's reference, and I won't go through it all, but you can find the vacancy studies from the Johnson report starting on page 22, continuing until page 44 of our submission. So page 22, this just shows the information from December 2016. You can see here the building, the total areas of buildings, the vacancy rate, and then the calculated vacancy rate for those properties. The year in question that we'd be looking at would be found on page 43. And I'll just give the board a moment to get there.
I think we're all there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So if you look third from the bottom, you'll see restaurant standalone. You'll see a total inventory of 359,007 square feet, vacancy of 35,862 square feet, equating to a vacancy rate of 10%. So again, when we take a look at that vacancy, that's where we're getting that vacancy from for restaurants. If the board will turn back with me, and I apologize one more time, to page 13.
We are there.
Thank you. So the last issue is capitalization rate. So the subject property has been assessed with a capitalization rate of 6%. M&P has reviewed sales within the market. Unfortunately, when we take a look at sales, first, there haven't been a lot of sales of restaurants. And second, there have been even fewer sales of newer restaurants. So in dealing with lack of restaurants, and particularly the newer restaurants, M&P has taken a look. And it's our opinion that there isn't really much difference in terms of the sale price between between restaurants and rental rates or retail sales when we take a look at the older buildings. So when we took a look at what restaurants are selling, we took a look at what retail buildings were selling, older properties, and we determined that there wasn't really much of a difference between sale prices. So what we did is we identified 3 newer retail properties. You can see one property is located on Taylor, 2 properties located on Portage there. They have a year of construction ranging from 2000 to 2010. When we take a look at the building areas range from 3,400 square feet up to 7,800 square feet, so roughly the same as the subject property. Sale dates of these properties range from 2016 and 2020. When we were determining what an appropriate rental rate to use when determining the capitalization rate, we used the asking rents from the Johnson report to determine what those rents would be, or determine what those asking rents would be, what was prevalent in the market at the time for retail properties. So again, we looked at retail properties. So we used prevalent asking rates for retail properties. The same thing with vacancy rates. We use the non-recoverables as calculated by the City of Winnipeg, as well as an $8 shortfall. Following these parameters, we calculated our net operating income for each one of these properties. Dividing that by the sale price, we ended up with our capitalization rates. Our capitalization rates range from 4.83% to 7.75%. Taking a look at these properties, they have a median of 7.31% and an average of 6.63%. So in our analysis, we used a 6.60% capitalization rate. The board will be able to find, in terms of the parameters used, we've provided the supporting documentation starting on page 23, continuing until page 44 within our analysis. Again, and what we're looking at is we're just looking at the asking rates for each one of these properties, and we're looking for stores and retail in office and apartments, as we felt that would be the most applicable to be using when determining those asking rates. So if the board will turn with me to page 14. In reviewing the property, again, it's our position that the rental rate is too high at just a little bit over $30. We feel that a rental rate of $28 would be more appropriate. The vacancy rate, again, we're requesting a 10% vacancy rate to be applied. With that 6.6% capitalization rate, the total resulting value would be $2,340,756, truncated to $2,340,700. Page 15 and 16 is just supporting information. And then I believe then on page 49 to 52 are just the sales that we've viewed, or the Johnson report highlighting the sales that we've utilized. So with that, I conclude my presentation. I welcome any questions from the board or from the assessment department. Thank you.
Thank you to the applicant, Mr. Pontanilla. Any questions on the evidence presented by the applicant?
I do. So it looks like one of the disputes we have, or differences, I guess, in our approach was the vacancy. So it's interesting that the vacancy was increased. Vacancy being a property being vacant. And so I'm curious, do you have any estimate for how long the restaurant was actually closed for? First of all, was the restaurant closed entirely?
I don't know. I can only speak to, I can't speak to specifically to the restaurant. I can speak to the, what happened in Winnipeg and in Manitoba specifically in terms of restrictions on restaurants and them being and the requirements to be eaten only for a number of months during the COVID pandemic. But unfortunately, I can't speak directly to this restaurant.
Okay. So you're not aware if the restaurant was closed Are you aware if the restaurant was limited to takeout only? Were they fully closed? Do you have no idea?
It would have been the same thing as what previously we would have been. Based on what the restrictions were from the province, they would have been restricted to takeout. Again, I can't speak to whether or not I can only speak in general terms. I can't speak to what this particular restaurant decided to do.
So pizza takeout when people are staying home. That's what they were allowed to do.
Yep. But again, I think when we're taking a look at what the overall market is, we're to have to consider what has been the impact when we're looking at the restaurant market, what's happened to vacancy rates. Again, recognizing this is an owner-occupied property, but we are applying a rental rate to it. So if you're looking at what is the possibility of renting the property within a market with 4% vacancy versus a 10% vacancy, you're going to have you're going to have more challenges in a 10% vacant market, which, again, in our position would have an impact in terms of what that value of that property would be.
If there was a vacancy on the property.
Right, but again, you're still looking at the overall market, right? So if there's more buildings that are available within the market, there's going to be more competition. So that's going to make it more challenging to lease the space. It's going to be vacant longer for a longer period of time. So again, if we're going to look at the property as an income producing property and take a look at what the implications of the market would be, generally it's understood that as vacancies increase, that causes more challenges to leasing the property.
But I guess my only concern with that is that we are speaking of this particular subject property. We're looking at this particular subject property. It appears we haven't had a vacancy during the pandemic, and yet you wanted to increase the vacancy on the income stream. I'm just having a hard time understanding that. If we are speaking of this subject property in particular, should the vacancy be increased to an amount that's beyond what the model is giving? I understand your position coming forward on it, that you have to have some vacancy on it to take into account the market, but that's what our model would have been, the 6%. So I was just curious on the vacancy, that's all.
Yep.
Besides that, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pontanillo. Robert, any questions of the applicant?
No questions.
Thank you. Carrie, any questions of the applicant?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Van Bregen, I'm going to go to page 13, please, on your cap rate study.
Yes.
Just to confirm, in the calculation of the cap rate, you're using estimated rental rates from Johnson Report, is that, or?
That's correct. So we're using the asking rental rates for for similar retail spaces. Same thing with the vacancy rates.
Okay, and the vacancy rates. Okay, so you're not using actuals when calculating the final cap rate.
Unfortunately, we don't have access to the actuals. As much as we'd love to have that information, we can't get a hold of it.
Okay, thank you. And now I'm going to go to the rental rate on page 11. Just to confirm, you're coming up with your adjusted rental rate at $28 based on asking rates as of January 21st only?
Correct. So we took a look. So what we did is we took a look at how the market has been changing for restaurant rates above, in terms of how have asking rates been changing. Overall, we determined that it looked like asking rates have been dropping since 2018. When we took a look at so we felt that asking rents as of Jan 2021 would be as close to the valuation date as possible, an appropriate rate to be using.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. That's all my questions. Mr. Pontanillo, we're going to proceed with your brief, but just allow us to find it here, please. Okay, Mr. Pontanillo, when you are ready for St. Mary's Road.
Okay, so as I believe we had previously mentioned, but I'll start from the start anyway. We have a file number 22-491, Roll number 0609-327-7300. The address is 4 St. Mary's Road. The 2023 assessed value had gone out at $2,998,000. And I do have a recommendation to make on this property, in fact. So if I can have your attention turned to page 8 of my brief. And if you just want to give me a second, I just want to make sure that I have the, yep, and I do have my adjustment open. All right, so originally on the valuation, we did have 6,534 square feet. We had a modeled valuation of $30.72 per square foot. It did give us a potential rent of $200,724. We do have a model vacancy of 6% in place, the modeled expense of 3%, and a shortfall at $8 per square foot to give us the net operating income of $179,885, which we then applied a 6% cap rate on to come up with our value that had gone out at $2,998,000. After a review of the property, it was deemed that the capitalization rate had increased slightly heavy from where we would have been previously, and some other indicators showing that perhaps the model had come in a little strong for this property. So my recommendation is to increase the cap rates. So the modeled valuation on the rental rates, unfortunately, if I had an income and expense mailer to look at, I could have taken a look at more. But as it stands, I only had a chance to look at the cap rates applied. And so I kept the valuation the same up to the cap rate, but the cap rate was increased to 6.68%. And that was based on an internal cap rate study that I performed, where I looked at some similar sales of subject properties, or of similar comparable properties, sorry. And that does give us a revised value of $2,693,000. $2,693,000. I do want to add that I did have communication with the agent. I was letting him know that I was working on the file. I apologize for not having given him a proper notice that I had a recommendation on it. So he's hearing this the first time that you guys are hearing it as well. I'm not sure if he wants to take a minute or two to get in contact with his client before we continue or not. I'll leave that up to him on what he feels, but I just wanted to put that forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the explanation. Mr. Van Bregen, I guess apparently you weren't aware of this recommendation. Would you like a minute to consider it or comment on it?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the recommendation from the assessor. Unfortunately, in order for me to accept it, I'd have to talk to the client, and I don't know. Like, I could send an email, but I don't know how long that would take. So I'll leave it up to the chair's opinion on how they want to proceed. But it could be a while. Just so you're
Fair
aware.
enough. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
No problem at all. Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions of the assessor at all, Mr. Van Bregen?
I guess more of my questions are related to the rental rate. Did we want to have a conversation about the rental rate and the other parameters, or is the assessor's done his brief? Sorry, I'm not quite sure where, am I just questioning the cap or?
No, his whole presentation, actually, you're open to
Okay.
questions. Yeah.
Okay. So if we can turn to page 7, please.
I think we're all there.
Excellent. So just to confirm, these are the leases that are being used when looking to determine the capital or the rental rate for the subject property. Is that correct?
Would have been a portion of it, correct? Yep.
Okay. All right. So when we take a look at these leases, I see for the most part, so which of these leases would you say, or which of these properties and leasing would you say would be most comparable to the subject property?
Just give me 1 second. I do have that on a document here. For St. Mary's. Sorry, just 1 second here.
No problem.
All right, so I had a few different angles that I was looking at. I was looking at all of them that were in my brief. So I have three areas that I look for. I look for the comparable that's most comparable in age, one that's most comparable in size, and the comparable that most appears to be similar to how the subject property is being used. So there's three indicators that I look at. So for the comp that's most comparable, and we have 2010 as the effective age on the subject property. It would be 1475 Henderson Highway, as it's a 2012 effective year. So it's only 2 years from where the subject is. And that one is actually leased out at $34 a square foot. And it is a Boston Pizza, so it's in the similar use to the subject. The comp most comparable in size, which would be 6,534 square feet, which the subject has, is also 1475 Henderson Highway, which is the Boston Pizza. They're at 6,320 square feet. And the comp that's most comparable in overall use is, in my opinion, 1475 Henderson Highway, which is the Boston Pizza. And that one is leased out at $34 a square foot.
Okay. So does it give, so is 1475 Henderson Highway part of, is it a pad on a larger retail site?
There might be some differences within from that one to the subject property, but that also accounts for the $34 lease as opposed to what the model has at $30.
Right, but in your experience, would you say that a pad on a retail site would rent higher or lower than a standalone restaurant?
Of course, if there's parking and then there's ease of access, there would be more value in the property.
Okay. The other question is, I'm seeing that lease for 1475 Henderson Highway was signed in 2012. Has the market changed since 2012?
It has.
And then lastly, this is located across the city on Henderson Highway. Would you expect these areas to rent the same, or would there be a difference in terms of rental rates?
There might be some difference in terms of rental rates, but I often find that people get really hung up on the locations of these comparables, and you have to keep in mind that the overall location is similar in the sense that it's close to a trunk or a regional road. St. Mary's being connected to Main Street and Henderson Highway being a regional road. They do have similar traffic that passes by, similar market densities. So they're actually not as different as what it seems to be if you look at simply the address.
Okay, and then I'm taking a look at your leasing here. I see a lease, so 980 St. Mary's Road. Or St. Anne's Road, sorry, second one from the bottom.
Yep.
So when I take a look at that, I see, 2016, so we'd be, a little bit newer than the subject property, correct?
That's correct.
I see that this was signed in 2017. Would you say 2017 is a better or worse indicator? Would be more or less comparable to 2021 rents?
Well, if we're strictly looking at the years, and of course, the 2017 is closer than a 2012, but that doesn't tell the whole story. There's other factors to consider as well.
Okay. And then when we're talking about location, would you say that the location on St. Anne's would be fairly comparable to to the property in question?
Yes and no. I mean, 4 St. Mary's literally is trunked to Main Street, whereas 980 St. Anne's is quite further south than where that would be.
Okay. And then I guess the last question is, when I'm taking a look at your information, I only see 2 rents that are above $30 a square foot. So the first one is that 1475 Henderson Highway, and the next one is the 191 Main, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is the Earls that just vacated on Main there.
It is.
Everything else I'm looking at is in most cases quite a bit lower than $30 a square foot. So again, with that in mind, do you feel, based on this evidence, that $30 a square foot is reasonable?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, there is a range, so it does fall higher within the range for sure. It's definitely higher within the range, but it's a newer property. It was built in 2010. There hasn't been any vacancy that it's been experienced, from my understanding. It's stayed open throughout the pandemic. They're still there. They're operating. They appear to have a strong tenant in place. I would say that in some ways, perhaps it could be comparable to some of those other higher leases. But again, I would like to have had the income and expense mailer to verify. Had I had the actual financial information, it'd be a lot easier to then see what the actuals are as opposed to what the model predicts the value to be. But should there be a change on it, I'll leave that to the board to decide.
Okay. I think that concludes my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Van Bregen. Carrie, do you have any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Just one. I just want to confirm with Mr. Pontinia, your brief is all model driven.
The original brief, yes, is all model driven, correct.
Thank you. That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Robert, any questions of the assessor?
No questions of the assessor.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Pontinia, just to confirm the revised workup resulting in the recommendation is using the existing NOI 179,885, and you've adjusted the cap rate upwards to 6.6% after analysis of the assessment, resulting in a value of $2,693,000 as your recommendation.
Everything is correct, except for the cap rate is actually 6.68%.
6.68, okay,
And that was a product of an analysis of an internal cap rate study I did.
okay. And would that be on restaurants or?
I mean, it's difficult to go for exact. Oh, you know what? Actually, the cap rate, I believe it was on restaurants. No, I had access to a handful. There isn't a lot, but I had access to a handful of sales that were standalone restaurants. So this would have been restaurant based.
Okay, and looking at your comps on page 7, the rent comparables. First of all, that cap rate study, was it based on freestanding restaurants? Would you be able to?
It was.
Okay.
I don't
And
have the information exactly in front of me to give off, and of course that's sort of proprietary information, but it was all on commercial standalone restaurants.
okay, thank you. And number 2 is, my second question is on page 7, the rent comparables. Could you quickly point out which ones are freestanding restaurants?
As far as my understanding, these are all freestanding restaurants. That's actually why I chose them, and that's actually why if you see the variation in location, although you know what? No, that's not exactly true. 675 Weatherden, I believe that would be, you know what? It actually does fall under the, no, it is. Yeah, it is. It's classified as a freestanding restaurant.
Okay,
I actually have that on the docket today, so.
okay,
But, yeah, these are all freestanding restaurants, so the rents do have a range to them. I won't dispute if there is. If you guys take a look at the rents, it's up to you. Had I had the income and expense information, of course, I could have a more informed decision on that. But it is what it is. These are all freestanding restaurants.
okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. And that's my last question. Does either party have a requirement for a summary? Mr. Pontinia?
I'm okay on my end.
Mr. Van Bregen?
No, Mr. Chair, I think I've said everything I need to say. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for appearing, and you'll hear from us as soon as possible.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Take care.
Bye-bye. That concludes 4 St. Mary's Road, item number 2. And I think at this time we will take, I think Mr. Newman is up next, I believe. So we will take a, how about a 6-minute break, recess. And number 7 is now 423 McMillan. Mr. Badger, I believe. Yeah.
Clear that.
Thank you, Jason. I'll now call the hearing back to order. Next item on the docket is item number 4, file number 222932. Address is 675 Weatherden Avenue, and we're dealing with a 2023 Realty Appeal. Good morning, Mr. Newman.
Good morning.
So, Roddy, when you are ready, please, 675 Weatherden Avenue.
Do we swear in the assessor or
Yeah, I'm sorry.
the applicant? Thank you. Mr. Moon, please state your full name.
Mark Newman.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Let me see it.
The assessor can begin, please.
Okay, so next up on the docket, we have file 22-2932. The roll number is 1209-773-9000. The address is 675 Weatherden Avenue. The 2023 assessment had gone out originally at $1,839,000. And I do have a recommendation to make on this file. So if I can direct your attention to page 8 of my brief. We originally have two premises on the income stream. We have one premise at 3,500 square feet at $24.33 per square foot. And then the second premise is 1,375 square feet at $25 a square foot for a total potential rent of $119,530. We do have model parameters in place of a 6% vacancy, 3% expense, and $8 shortfall to bring us to an NOI of $106,647. And then we have a modeled cap rate of 6.8%, or sorry, 5.8%, which brings us to our original assessment of $1,839,000. So for the recommendation, I have kept the rental rates the same for both premises. So we have the same potential rent of $119,530. I have kept the same parameters for vacancy, expenses, and shortfall. So we have the same net operating income of $106,647. And after a review of the subject property, it was deemed that a cap rate movement would be appropriate. So the cap rate was increased to 6.8%. And the revised value on that is $1,568,000.
Thank you, Mr. Pontanillo. Mr. Newman, any questions or comments regarding the recommendation by the assessor?
Yes, I have a couple of questions, if I might. Mr. Pontanillo, first of all, thank you. And I'll let the panel know that the assessor actually called me at 9 o'clock last night. And by agreement between us, he's working hard and trying to keep up. So I'm appreciative of that. You mentioned in an earlier hearing that you had done a cap rate study for standalone restaurants. And is that part of the reason why this property is being adjusted to 6.8%?
No, so in this particular property, so with the way our models work, we do have different cutoff points for the cap rates, and it's based on size.
Yeah.
And so the size at this one is at 4,875 square feet overall is a total size. It's close enough to the modeled cliff rate that 1% increase would be deemed appropriate on this property. So that's how I came to the conclusion of a 6.8% cap rate.
Okay, and I've been aware of this before, and I was actually going to ask you about this. So there's a 5,000 square foot threshold or cutoff point, if you will, below which the cap rate is 1% lower than if you're above 5,000 square feet?
That's my understanding of the modeling, correct?
Right. And so that's what's doing it in this case. Okay. And so the fact that you did a separate study, you told us for restaurants, which led to an adjustment in some other cases here, it's simply the fact that it's close enough to the threshold.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions. And I'll indicate, Mr. Chairman, that the recommendation is acceptable.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Newman. Excuse me. Carrie, any questions of the assessor?
I have no questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Robert, any questions?
I have no questions.
I'm just my question would be, Mr. Ponting, just to confirm what you presented here. So the NOI has stayed the same at 106,647, but you've revised the cap rate upwards by 1% to 6.8%.
That's correct.
Resulting in a recommendation of $1,568,000. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
All right. Thank you for that, Mr. Newman. With our new process, we're required to document what the applicant has provided. So I'm going to ask you, we're going to go to your brief, and we're going to ask you to present a quick summary of the evidence that you presented in your brief. So we have a reasoning for your presentation, okay?
Yes, so the submission in my brief actually sought a value of $1,547,000. I used the same variables. I used the same rents, the same vacancy, the same shortfall. One difference was the assessor non-recoverable was 3%, mine was 5%. And the other difference was I was selecting a 6.75% cap rate. The assessor has gone to 6.8%, as you've heard. And so that's what I was going to present to you. But as I've noted, the assessor's recommendation at $1,568,000 is acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Carrie, any questions of the applicant?
I have no questions, thank you.
Thank you. Robert, any questions?
I have no questions.
Mr. Newman, sorry. So the changes you made were, the parameters were the same except for the expenses at 5% from the assessor's 3%. And I missed the second reasoning, please.
The other adjustment was the capitalization rate.
Okay.
And I was bringing it up to 6.75%. And as you heard, the assessor based on the model is at 6.8%.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Thank you for that explanation. Does either party have a reason for a summary?
No.
No, everybody.
Not on my end, sorry.
Okay, thank you. That concludes item number 4, 675 Weatherden Avenue. Next item on the docket is item number 5, file number, excuse me, 22-3116, 980 St. James Street. And we're dealing with a 2023 realty appeal. 980, okay. No preliminary issues here. Mr. Pantanillo, I'm just going to pull up your brief here before we proceed. Mr. Pantanillo, when you're ready, 980 St. James Street.
Okay, so the next file we have on the docket is file 22-3116. The roll number is 0700-136-7500. The address is 980 St. James Street. The 2023 assessed value had gone out at $1,323,000. So if I could direct your attention to page 2, I have included a pad eye view image of the subject property so we can see its orientation on St. James there. On page 3, I have included an overhead image of the subject property. You can see there's a drive-through component and the entrance and the exit runs off St. James Street. On page 4, I have included an east-facing view of the subject property and a west-facing view of the subject property to show both sides to get an idea. And then on page 5, I have included the Google Street View images of the subject property in question. So you can see both the tenant and the use of the property. So we do have a lease on the property. It's a 5-year lease that was written in 2017, 3,030 square feet at $16.50 per square foot. And sorry, I jumped over the request for income information. We have received income and expense information from the subject property. And we have no sales history on the subject property. So for my comparables, I have included quite a spread of comparables. These comparables, granted, aren't all within the same neighborhood, but they are all within the same similar type of use in the sense that they're fast food restaurants. And we do have a rental range that's has a spread from, it appears to be $27.02 at the lower end, up to as high as $45 at the high, or $46 even at the higher end. For the income stream on page 9, we do have it tenanted as a fast food tenant within 3,030 square feet at $28.06 per square foot. We do have model parameters in place of a 6% modeled vacancy, a 3% model expense, and an $8 shortfall per square foot to bring us to a net operating income of $76,069. And then we have applied a modeled cap rate of 5.75% to give us an overall value on the subject of $1,323,000. On page 10, we do have an income value summary of the subject property itself. You can see how we arrived at the $1,323,000. On page 11, we do have some cap rate information. We don't have restaurants for the city of Winnipeg's cap rate information for retail properties. But you do see a spread at the lower end on the strip malls from 6 to 6.8%. And again, that's for strip malls, so it's not for a freestanding restaurant. We do have on page 12 Municipal Assessment Act excerpts that are typical for the appeal. And then on page 13, taking us to the end of the brief, is the subject's income and expense mailer information. The COVID questionnaire wasn't filled out, so we're not sure if the impact and how it was on the subject. And we do have some information given here. I'd have to actually switch this around here. That we do have a note on there that the ownership interest is limited to the land lease on the property. I'm trying to read it upside down here. And they have no knowledge of the day-to-day operations or how COVID-19 has affected the business. So I guess that answers the COVID questionnaire being not filled out. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you to the assessor. Mr. Newman, any questions on the assessor's evidence presented?
Yes, so page 2 of your brief,
Yep.
The pad eye view, as you called it. So the property is bell-shaped, I'll describe it. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
And of course, the narrow end of the bell is the frontage on St. James. And so this property actually has limited frontage on St. James, correct?
That would be correct.
And if we look at page 3, you've got the overhead photo. And you can actually see that a significant portion of the property, I'll suggest, you see the number 980 on the building. Below that, towards the bottom of the page, you can see that that portion of the property is not utilized in any way.
That's correct.
And you'd agree with me that the configuration of the property does not lend to the most efficient use of the property overall, correct?
It would appear that way.
All right. Then if we jump ahead, it's my page 6, which is the subject property leases. So you're noting the lease at $16.50 a square foot. But then you move on with a set of comparables. And then I get to what is my page 8, which is the valuation, the rent, the vacancy, etc. And so we've got a 5.75% capitalization rate on this property, correct?
That's correct.
And that's model driven.
It's all model driven.
All right. So let's talk about restaurants for a minute. Because you made reference to the cap rate chart and retail, and you noted the fact that there's not a category for restaurants, correct?
That's correct. Unfortunately, correct. I wish we did have one there, but it kind of causes me grief at times. But that is correct. Well,
let me see if I can gently add to your grief a little bit. So the 5.75%, again, you've said it's model generated, and I'm assuming that the size of this building is having an impact on the cap rate.
I would assume so as well, correct?
Right. And yet, as you note, when you go to your cap rate chart on page 10, strip malls the range on strip malls at the city of 20th and 80th percentiles is 6 to 6.8%, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Then, and again, I want to come back to what I asked you about in the last hearing and what we've heard about earlier, which is this internal cap rate study that you've done, or somebody has done, of standalone restaurants. And you've made mention of the fact that that cap rate study indicates a cap rate of 6.68%, correct?
So I want to clarify on that before we continue forward. When I refer to the internal cap rate study, that was done by myself. There's no one else to put that on. And what I did was I just looked at the recent sales that we have on a spreadsheet.
Mr. Pantanillo, Mr. Newman, I'm gonna just state something here. You're referring to another hearing information presented. We're in a new hearing with this particular property. Mr. Pantanillo has not brought up that cap rate study in his presentation at all. So I'm going to consider that not a relevant question for what he's presented so far.
So then I'm going to ask a different question.
Okay.
Mr. Pontanilla, have you done a cap rate study of restaurants?
So what I did is I looked at some sales that I could have access to within our internal documents, and these sales were related to particular files that I was working on at the moment. So I didn't have any strong sales within this location, let's say, or within the subject that we're speaking of now. So that's why I had no information on the cap rate study, and I left it at model given.
Okay, but let me ask you a question. And Mr. Hutchings, I am mindful of your concern about things we've heard at other hearings, and that is why I will ask the assessor questions so we create the record in this hearing in relation to the matters I'm asking about.
The problem is that your question is being derived by something presented at another hearing.
Why does that matter?
Because Mr. Pontanillo did not bring up his cap rate study and his evidence presented so far in this particular hearing.
Well, respectfully, Mr. Hutchings, I think I'm entitled to address and review and challenge the assessor's capitalization rate with any information I have, no matter where I've gotten it and how I've gotten it, as long as it's relevant.
Except where you're questioning what he presented as evidence, and he did not present that evidence in this particular property.
And that's why I'm not framing it based on what he did in another hearing. I'm asking him the question simply so he can answer it and make it part of the record in this hearing.
I reject that argument. You're just coming from a different angle to get the information that was presented from another hearing. Again, he never presented the evidence. In my opinion, I'm ruling that you're bringing in new evidence.
And why can't I do that?
Because you can do it when you're presenting, and then we'll put how much weight we want on it. But at this time, the assessor did not present his, I'll call it, mini cap rate study that he referred to in another brief.
Okay, look, Mr. Hutchings, I'll respect your ruling, but I'll say simply, I believe I am entitled to ask the assessor any question that is relevant in relation to the capitalization rate. Whether the source of my question is a magazine article I read or something that was told to me by an appraiser, I don't think it really matters. The point is the question relevant to the exercise we're going through? But okay. I will respect your ruling.
And to respect you, Mr. Newman, when you make your presentation, you can present that evidence then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Pontanilla, let me ask you this. Do we agree that in the relative scheme of different types of businesses, restaurants are a riskier business than many others?
I can agree to that statement.
Many restaurants fail and close?
Sure, I can agree to that statement.
And that creates a higher risk for investors who are buying these type of buildings. And frequently that higher risk is reflected in the form of a higher capitalization rate. Do you agree?
I do agree typically that would be the approach.
All right. And so in your cap rate chart, when we have strip malls, as you've noted at the 20th and 80th percentiles at 6 to 6.8%, restaurants, I'm going to suggest to you, are a riskier investment than strip malls. Do you agree?
I would agree to that.
All right. We've talked a little bit about the model that works off the size of buildings. And do you agree with me that smaller buildings are frequently bought by owners who are going to occupy for their own use?
I would say, based on my experience so far, that it's a little difficult to answer that, actually, Mr. Newman, because I respectfully have seen a little bit of both. I have seen some bigger units that were owner occupied, as well as smaller units. So it's a little hard to agree to that statement.
Okay, fair enough. So we do agree that through COVID, many restaurants encountered various restrictions. At times, they were fully closed to dine-in service. At other times, they were allowed limited dine-in service. At times, they were allowed takeout service. It sort of bounced around a bit through the COVID experience. You agree with that?
I agree to that.
All right. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Carrie, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Yes, Mr. Pantania, page 7 of your brief. Are any of your rent comparables other Tim Hortons franchises?
There are a few. If we look at 1385 McPhillips Street, I have that as a Tim Hortons. If we look at 1750 Plessis Road, I have that as a Tim Hortons. If we look at 854 Nairn Avenue, I have that as a Tim Hortons. If we look at 25 Donwood Drive, I have that one listed as a Tim Hortons.
Okay.
Those are the ones that I have on file.
Thank you. And just one other question, because it has been discussed. Why is there not a restaurant category on the city's cap rate?
I'm not sure, I wish I had a better answer for you, but the truth is that I don't work on the tables and how they get generated. We do have different sections that work on those things and prepare our documents for us. I do lament it. I wish I had something as well, because I would like to be able to point to something as well that would aid me, so to speak, in my presentation. And yeah, there's not much more I can say to it on that.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thanks, Carrie. Robert, any questions?
No questions.
Thank you. Follow up on Carrie's question, Mr. Pantanillo, page 7, the 4 Tim Hortons that you referenced in your rent comparables, are those all freestanding?
I believe, I don't have that information in front of me. I don't want to say the wrong thing and then contradict myself. It looks like 1750 Plessis Road. I think that might be part of a strip there, so that might not be a freestanding. I believe 854 Nairn Avenue is a freestanding restaurant. I believe 25 Donwood Drive is as well a freestanding restaurant. And 1385 McPhillips Street, I want to say that one is too. But sometimes I might be confusing it with something, but I want to say that one is as well. So It looks like out of the 4 I gave you, 1750 Plessis Road, that one's part of a strip, I believe.
All right. Thank you for that. And that's my only question. Mr. Newman, allow us to get to your brief, please. Okay, Mr. Newman, when you're ready, 980 St. James Street.
Thank you. So one of the things I always wonder about is, why does the city have a category of building called restaurants? Because I'm not sure why they do. At the end of the day, a building is a building. And yes, there are different types and styles and sizes of building, but a building is a building. And it may be a restaurant use today. Tomorrow it may be a different use. It may be a different use today, and tomorrow it might be a restaurant use. What is different about restaurants, I'll suggest to you, is that they need far greater mechanical systems to service the needs of the restaurant. They need significant fire suppression systems, significant ventilation systems. We've all seen the kitchens of restaurants and the stainless steel hoods over cooking areas and the ventilation of all that. And of course, they need significant ventilation and HVAC systems to ensure customer comfort. Beyond that, a building's a building in many ways. And yet, for some reason, we have the city creates a separate category of restaurant buildings. We've had discussion about the capitalization rate and the fact that the model, depending on, and I believe this to be the case, that, and I've experienced it over the years, city models, when you get below 5,000 square feet, the capitalization rate drops. I've seen it in the case of banks historically, where that was an issue frequently over the years. I believe it's the case in respect of restaurants as well, that there's a threshold where you're under 5,000 square feet, the cap rate drops. Why? Why does the cap rate drop by 1%? Is the risk different? The user, a restaurant, as the assessor has acknowledged, they are risky. They have a high frequency of failure. They have a high frequency of turnover because the restaurant business, and there is material in my brief, which I will get to, but the restaurant business is a tough business with thin margins, and that is why many restaurants fail. And so the fact that it's over 5,000 square feet or under 5,000 square feet, respectfully, I will say should make absolutely no difference because the risk is there and therefore the capitalization rate should increase. So I say that by way of general commentary to you. I would ask you to consider this as the general commentary that will apply in the next hearing as well. If you're prepared to do that, if you're not, then I'll repeat it for the next hearing, whatever you prefer. So dealing with this property, the sole item I'm taking issue with is the capitalization rate. This property is unusual in the sense that it's a bell-shaped property, as we noted. It's got limited frontage on St. James. When you look at the spectrum of properties, whenever you've got more limited frontage, that does not improve the value. Frontage, especially on a street like St. James, is considered to be of value. The fact that it's bell-shaped with the narrow portion fronting on St. James, it leads to inefficient use of the property. And in many ways, there's property that is wasted. And again, for an investor, that potentially increases the risk. So in my brief, and I'm just going to summarize this because, again, I don't think there's really much issue about this. Starting at the lower part of page 2, I speak about COVID, the state of emergency, the public health orders, restaurants, you can serve limited numbers. You can't serve anybody in-house, takeout only. You can serve family members and you have to check their ID. Remember how happy restaurateurs were about the concept of having to check ID to make sure everybody was in the same family. So they've gone through a very difficult time, but these are the measures we've been through. Who knows where this is all going to end and when it's going to end. A lot of restaurateurs, a lot of tenants generally could not pay their rent. At page 4 of my brief, there's a reference to the Colliers study on the impact of rents being paid. And I continue to see reporting in the newspapers about this. It is an ongoing issue. The COVID rent subsidy programs put in place by the government that force landlords, if they wanted to get paid, to effectively give up 25% of their rents. So then I move to talk about retail capitalization rates, because in my view, restaurants are really retail. That's what they are. I know the city creates a different category, but to me, they are really retail. And it's freestanding buildings especially, they don't have the benefit of being in a mall that's drugstore anchored or grocery store anchored, which are always considered to be better properties because the grocery store and the drugstore drive traffic to these sites. So the assessor's chart, as we've addressed with him, at the 20th percentile at 6% on strips, at the 80th at 6.8. A freestanding restaurant, as the assessor acknowledges, is riskier than a strip. And therefore, in my view, it needs a higher capitalization rate. If you jump ahead to page 9, at the bottom, I talk about the fact that at the best of times, the restaurant industry is replete with risk. Restaurants come and go, small local business operators a lot of the time. Yes, there are some national chains. Yes, Olive Garden at 51 Renders is a national chain. I've heard evidence that their cap rate is 6.5% and increased 7%. But at top of page 10, I make reference to the fact that the Perkins location's closed, Stella's closed multiple locations, Segovia closed, Hermano's closed, and these are intended as examples only. Many other restaurants have closed. Restaurants suffer from staff shortages. Risky business is the simple answer and point I'm trying to make to you. I'm selecting a rate of 6.5%. What I am doing here is I am recognizing a little bit the location on St. James and the fact that theoretically that might create additional options for use. But that's what I've done. And so if you look to my page 12, you can see my calculation where essentially I've used all of the assessor's variables getting to the net operating income of $76,068. I then increased the capitalization rate to 6.5%, and that results in a value of $1,170,280. What then follows are a series of news articles about the restaurant industry and closures. There's a picture of Starbucks. Starbucks closed 300 locations. There's another article about Hermanos and Segovia and the lean profit margins in restaurants. So that's really my presentation. And really my argument is only and simply that the capitalization rate needs to increase. So that's my argument. That's my submission. And I ask that you reduce the value.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Does the assessor have any questions on the evidence presented by the applicant?
I guess really my only concern would have been the impact that the pandemic had on the subject itself. Mr. Newman, are you aware of the subject having been closed for any amount of time, or were they reduced only to takeout along with the rest of the with the orders that were kind of blanketed to the rest of the restaurants at the time?
So in my experience, Tim Hortons typically they do a significant takeout business, obviously, through drive-thrus. That wouldn't have changed, but they do have some limited capacity within the restaurants, and they would have been subject to the same restrictions as other restaurants. And, again, they bounced around. At points, they were fully closed. At points, they were limited capacity. They would have been subject to all of that.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. I have no more questions.
Thank you. Robert, any questions of Mr. Newman?
I have no questions.
Carrie, any questions?
Just one question, Mr. Newman. I'm just confirming with you that you're requesting the cap rate to be increased to 6.5.
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, my only question is, so you're accepting the workup by the assessor to come up with the net operating income, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so 76,0669 rounded, but adjusted cap rate of 6.5% compared to the assessor. Okay. All right. That is my only question, just to clarify that. Mr. Pontanillo, any requirement for summary?
No, I'm okay on my end, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Newman?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes 980 St. James Street. Our next item on the docket is file number 22-2926, item number 6, and it's 3128 Portage Avenue. And we're dealing with a 2023 Realty Assessment Appeal. And Mr. Pantanillo, please wait a second while I get this open. Okay, Mr. Pantanillo, when you're ready, 3128 Portage Avenue.
Okay, thank you. We'll now proceed with the next item on the docket, which is file 22-2926. The roll number is 0756 408-0100, sorry. The address is 3128 Portage Avenue. The 2023 assessment had gone out at $578,000, and I do have a recommendation to make on this file. So if I can direct your attention to page 9 of my brief. We have a C4 standard restaurant at 1,476 square feet. And then we have a model to rent it at $24.38 per square foot, which gives us a total potential rent of $35,985. And then we do have a modeled vacancy of 6%, an expense of 3%, and a shortfall of $8 per square foot to bring us to our net operating income of $32,103. Which the model has then applied a 5.55% cap rate on it to bring us to our total value of $578,000. After a review, it was deemed that the cap rate was coming in a little aggressive on this subject property in particular. And so the recommendation would be to increase the cap rate. Oh, sorry, I just have the wrong one open here. So the model is still 1,476 square feet at $24.38 a square foot. We have the 6% vacancy, 3% expense, and $8 shortfall to bring us to the same net operating income of $32,103. And we do have a 6.25% cap rate that's now applied to it to bring us to a revised value of $514,000. And that's with a 6.25% cap rate.
Thank you, Mr. Pantanillo. Mr. Newman, any questions or comments regarding that recommendation?
Yes. So let me just say, I appreciate the recommendation, but I do want to speak to this matter further. So maybe the assessor should complete his submission if he hasn't already, and then I'll ask some questions and we'll get to it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Newman.
Okay, so if I can take your attention to page 2 of my brief, I do have the pad eye view image of the subject property. On page 3 of my brief, I do have an overhead view of the subject property, so we can see its orientation on Portage Avenue at the corner of Portage Avenue and Gulf Boulevard. On page 4, we do have a north-facing view of the subject property and a west-facing view of the subject property. On page 5, we do have some Google Street View images of the subject property. We have received requests for income information from the subject. We do have a sale from 2018 for $485,000. That was a sworn value sale on the subject property. We have no property lease information on file there. For my comparables, I did attempt to choose some comparables both from within the neighborhood and some freestanding restaurants from throughout the city. So we do have a spread there of rents that range from $15.72 at the lower end up to $23.50 or $24, I guess, at the higher end. Following that, I do have the original income valuation that's on the subject property. So we have gone through that already to bring us to the original valuation of $578,000. And the cap rate was increased to 6.25 to give us a revised value of $514,000. And then following that, we do have an income value summary of the subject property itself. We do have our capitalization rate table of the subject property itself. We have the Municipal Assessment Act excerpts of the subject property itself. And then on page, I believe it's 12 of your brief, up to the end, we do have the property's impact and expense or income and expense information. And we do have some information. It wasn't filled in entirely, but we do have a modeled, or we do have a monthly rent on there of $3,500 a month. And then on page 18, I believe, of your brief, we do have a income type declared as net and $42,000 listed as the total income. And then that takes us to the end of the income and expense mailer information and the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you to the assessor. Mr. Newman, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Yes. So again, page 8, the valuation originally at $578,000, now changed to $514 by way of the adjustment of the cap rate, all model driven initially, correct?
That's correct.
What causes the cap rate to come to 6.25%? Where's 6.25% coming from?
So it would have been in combination with taking a review of what the previous cap rate was on the property to see, how much of a drop it was from one cycle to the other. And then I took a look at some other recent sales within the neighborhood of some properties just to get an idea of what the cap rate was on those. And then I deemed 6.25% to be an appropriate cap rate on this subject property, given the tenant that's in place and some of the information that I saw. It just led me to believe that 6.25 was an appropriate cap rate.
So this is a small building, only 1,476 square feet.
It is.
And your model rent is $24.38, but if we go back to page 7,
yep.
Which are your comparables, in fact, there's not a single one that has a rate of $24.38, correct?
That's correct.
And again, the model's spitting out the model rent, I'm assuming. And do you have a sense that, again, because of the size, the smaller the square footage, the higher the model is going to kick out the rent?
That would have been an indicator as well. Another one is that I did try to take a look at the limited information that we did have from the income and expense mailer itself.
Yeah.
If you just give me a second here, I'm just going to bring up the document that I had. So if we look there, I did do somewhat of an analysis. So if we take that $3,500 a month that's declared and we times it by 12, it does give us $42,000 a year. We didn't have an area that was declared, so I couldn't use the area that would have been put as it was left blank. But if we use our area of 1,476 square feet, it gives an actual rent of $28.46 a square foot. So that was my indicator for the rental rates. I'm aware that the comparable information that I put in the brief, you are correct that it does seem to stand out compared to some of the information that I had on there. But that was sort of one of the indicators I looked at. I did look at the rents and wonder if they needed an adjustment, but just from the information that was declared, it led me to believe that maybe the model wasn't so off at $24. I could be wrong on that, though. This is just from the analysis that I used on the information presented.
I understand. Did you do any investigation to determine whether the building is actually owner occupied?
I did some, but I don't want to. I couldn't come up with any answer on that.
Okay. And if you look at your page 18, there, which is the income and expense questionnaire,
yep.
There are no recoveries shown, correct?
That is correct. And that's why there's limited weight on that. That's exactly what I was kind of alluding to, that the information presented isn't, by no means am I hanging my hat on that as saying that that's what the value is. It's just an indicator of what they declared. So if they're declaring a net lease, you are correct though, sir. There are no recoveries listed, so it's difficult to know exactly what that would be, but I'm going on the information presented.
And eventually what it reflects is a net operating income of $21,387.
That's correct. They are, yeah, and they are including property tax as one of the expenses there as well. I did make a note of that.
Yeah, okay. So do you agree with me, just as a matter of general concept, that as rents get higher, the ability of a tenant to pay high rent creates greater risk in relation to the property?
I can agree to that.
And so generally speaking, the higher the rents, the higher the capitalization rate may be.
Depending on the tenant, of course, there's always variables, but as a general rule of thumb, I can agree to that.
Yes, and so if we had the Royal Bank of Canada, for example, in space at $25 a square foot, we wouldn't worry about their ability to pay.
That's correct. Or let's say a Subway or some kind of a national chain if we're keeping it to restaurants.
Right. But this is not a national chain. This is not rated. Right.
And that's exactly why I felt that the cap rate was a little aggressive on this one. This is a local restaurant, and I don't think it should have the same cap rates applied that fast food national chain type restaurants should have. So
okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Carrie, any questions of the assessor?
I just have a general question about vacancy, Mr. Pontanilla.
sure.
It just seems this year that the city is sort of giving a blanket 6% on the vacancy for restaurants. And I'm just wondering, was there no consideration about what happened over the past 2 years? And
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I as an employee here as well, I often wonder too, when we were coming up to the cycle, if there was going to be any concessions in regards to any let's say COVID adjustments, if we want to call it that, or pandemic adjustments. I didn't find an answer to that, so unfortunately I can't give a reason as to why there was nothing in place. I'm not aware of any tools that we have per se that I can pull out and say, oh, due to the pandemic, I can apply X. So I was still just having the same approach that I had for all my other previous appeals. I guess maybe one could argue that if there was a more of an indicator per se of if some restaurants had clearly suffered tremendously, and maybe there could be a case-by-case analysis or adjustment based on that. But as a blanket approach, we don't have anything. It's just whatever the model was for this cycle for a vacancy, that's what we use.
okay, well, then it leads me to wonder why the questionnaire was sent out.
I mean, we did get a response from some income and expense mailers did provide some good information on it. Some were left blank. I guess maybe at the time, again, this is strictly speculation. By no means am I the director of the department. I'm not in charge of any of those decisions. They're well above my pay grade per se. But with that being said, as a speculation, I would think that maybe there was a time and place during the pandemic. There was a lot of decisions that were being made, and there was a lot of questions as to how we can document the impacts that were going on. And maybe at the time it was deemed that the department thought it was good to have a historical document to be able to rely on just in case something should change in our approach in the future. And as it turns out, we can all see that the pandemic had an effect at the start, but that it kind of started to mitigate into a form of life that eventually led us to where we are today. So it's tough to say, right? Like a lot of restaurants, they were limited to takeout only. I'm not really sure, I can't speak to how they did in their finances because that's not part of the information that we receive. We have no idea of their sales, how they dipped, how they increased, how they didn't. We can only base on whether the tenants are still there. Did they go vacant? Did they not? Which tenants survived? Which tenants didn't? So that's really the best that I can speak to that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Pontanilla.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Carrie. Robert, any questions of the assessor?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Mr. Pantanillo, my question is regarding the 2018 sale on the subject property.
Yep.
I'm trying to find where you probably page 2, would it be, or
6.
Page 6. There we go. Okay, so we're showing a sale at $485,000. Was there a sale? Do you have any access to a sales check that was done on that property?
I do. I can only speak to it verbally as I haven't included it as evidence. So put whatever weight you want on it. But from what I looked at, it does appear to be an arm's length bona fide sale. And it was included in for analysis within our model. So it looks like it was verified. And that it looks to be an arm's length transaction for $485,000.
Okay, so I guess my question is, in your opinion, I don't know if you analyzed it this deeply, but was there some business interest?
I'm not sure. I can't speak to that.
Okay, now my last question is, was there a cap rate done on that sale?
I mean, there should be one, yeah, if we were to bring that up. I don't have that document in front of me now, so
Okay.
I can't speak to what the cap rate would have been, but I'm assuming, yeah, at the time, if we put the sale in and we did our analysis of it, we would have drawn a cap rate from that sale.
Okay, but you never presented it, so okay.
No, I didn't exactly.
Okay, thank you. And I believe that's my question. Mr. Newman, when just allow me to find your brief here before we proceed. Okay, when Mr. Newman, 3128 Portage Avenue, when you're ready, please.
So let me start by indicating, as I asked of the assessor, this is an owner-occupied property. The operators of the restaurant are the people who bought the property. Historically, there had been restaurants on the site. And accordingly, I believe that what they were trying to do was continue a business operation. My brief, what it reflects ultimately is acceptance of the rent of $24.37, but a challenge to the capitalization rate. And frankly, in hindsight, I think the rent is excessive. I had made mention of a restaurant directly across the street in 2,040 square feet in Greenway Plaza at $13 a square foot, Steve's Place. And reflecting upon the assessor's comps, and as we noted, there's not one at $24.38 a square foot. There are many restaurants of smaller size along Portage that have rents in the $15, $17, $14 range. And so ultimately, I do think that the rent of $24.37 is very high for a property of this type. That leads to, but nonetheless, I left that rent alone. And, you know, my brief speaks about COVID and the impacts on restaurants and the yo-yo impacts of takeout only, limited in service, families only, check the ID, that yo-yo, they all went through. But ultimately, what it comes down to for me is that, and the assessors acknowledged this, let's not forget that when I wrote the brief, I was facing what I thought was a 5.55% capitalization rate, which frankly struck me as ridiculous for a property like this. And the assessor has, in essence, acknowledged that by bringing it up to 6.25%, and I appreciate that. I still think it's too high. I think the rents are too high. I think the cap rate is too low at 6.25%. And frankly, the value I asked for of $493,892, let's call it $494,000, is too high because I used the assessor's rent. And in hindsight, I should not have. I should have both dropped the rent and increased the capitalization rate. And that would have brought the value down further. And, you know, I can ask you to do what you will in that regard, but what my brief reflects is a value of $494,000 rounded using the assessor's NOI and bringing the cap rate up to 6.5%. For all the reasons you've heard me articulate about restaurants and risk, and all those reasons are even more pronounced in the context of this site and this small building and this small family-owned restaurant, which is not a national chain. It's none of those things. And from an investment perspective, this is much higher risk, I would submit to you, especially with that rent of in excess of $24. So I'm asking you to do what you will in terms of the value. At the ceiling on the value, I would suggest should be $494,000. But frankly, I think a $17 rent would be better suited for this property. And I just played around with some numbers, and at a $17 rent, the net operating income becomes $22,171, which by coincidence, and it wasn't intended this way, is very similar to what the questionnaire reports. And then the question becomes, what are you going to do by way of a capitalization rate? Because if you go to 6.5%, then we're starting to look at a value of $341,000. And I recognize there was a sale, but you've got owners who are motivated to acquire a location so they can operate a business. So what I'm saying to you is the ceiling on this value should be $494,000. And I'm asking you to consider reducing the rent and bringing that value down further. Those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Pantanillo, any questions of the assessor? Pardon me, of the applicant?
No, I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. Robert, any questions of Mr. Newman?
No questions.
Thank you. Carrie?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Newman, so you've presented us with two options here,
I have.
I believe. Your primary one is just adjusting the cap rate by 0.25% and using the assessor's NOI. That's correct?
Yes.
And number two is
Do you want me to give you some numbers using a $17 rent?
yes, please. I think we would require calculations.
So let me do that. So
Okay, thank you.
1,476 square feet at $17 a square foot creates potential income of $25,092.
Okay,
With a 6% vacancy, the effective gross income becomes $23,586.
okay,
The 3% expense becomes $707.
all right,
The shortfall at $8 is $708. That doesn't change.
yes,
The net operating income becomes $22,171.
all right,
And if you apply a 6.5% capitalization rate, value becomes $341,092.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that final value, please?
$341,092.
Okay, so, okay, 341,000 rounded. Okay. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Does the assessor have any questioning on that revised request?
I do. So how did that $17 come up? Because the actuals themselves are $28, as we had previously discussed. And if we want to say that, let's say, if we do the math on it here, if you just give me 1 second. So we have $3,500 a month, which is declared, times 12 to $42,000 a year. Using our area, we get $28.46 a square foot. That's using our area because we have no area declared by them. But even if we want to say that, let's say that that was a gross rent. So if we try to net that out, oh, is that where you got that $17 from?
I actually didn't get to it in that way. I got to it, frankly, by looking at your comparables and looking at a series of properties on Portage with rents in the range of $1,450 to $1,750.
Okay.
But by coincidence, just by coincidence, the $22,171 is very similar to the net operating income of $21,387 reported in the questionnaire.
Okay. And then so the explanation for the $485,000 in 2018 is they were motivated to buy, I guess, is the reason why
They were buying a business location.
Fair enough. Okay, that's all my questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Robert, do you have any questions on the revised workup there that presented by the applicant?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Carrie?
I have no questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I guess just for me to understand, Mr. Newman, your initial request was 494,000. You're revising your request down to 341,000 for us to consider. Would that be fair?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Newman. All right.
Thank you to the panel. Good morning.
Okay, thank you. That concludes item number 8, 3128 Portage Avenue. And before we call Mr. Badger in, I think we were going to take a 5-minute break, please, Jason. Thank you, Jason. I'll now call the hearing back to order. Jason, can you please swear in the applicant?
Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Jeffrey L. Badger.
Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, Mr. Badger. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. How about yourselves?
Very good, thanks. Been a while.
Had a busy morning.
Yeah. Okay, the next property on the docket is item number 7, file number 22-788. Address is 423 McMillan Avenue. And Mr. Assessor, we do have a preliminary issue of a non-cooperation request under section 53-3. Would you like to introduce the property, and then we'll deal with that non-cooperation request first?
Sure, I can do that. So I'll start by just introducing the file for the record. It's a file 22-788. The roll number is 1202-124-1000. The address is 423 McMillan Avenue. The 2023 assessment had gone out at $1,034,000. And as you mentioned, there is a request for non-compliance. So if I can direct your attention to page, I believe it's 13 of my brief. I'll give you a second to get there. So the document
I'm not contesting the order for the non-compliance. If you just want to,
yeah, I can round it up for expediency, sure. So the page 13 is the document that Canada Post provided that shows that the item was delivered and that it was signed for. And then on page 16, we do have the address listed over top for the cover letter. And if you look at the tracking number, LP 578-617-655-CA, we can cross-reference that with what the tracking number is on the Canada Post document, LP 578-617-655-CA, just to verify that that was the parcel that was delivered to the subject. And that's my presentation.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Badger, you're saying you're not contesting it. Is that your evidence?
that's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're required to recess and consider the evidence presented on this request for non-compliance. Jason, can you please send us in camera? Thank you, Jason. I will now call the hearing back to order. The panel has considered evidence presented by both parties, and it is our opinion that the request for non-compliance be granted under section 53-3, and that if any reduction is issued, that it follows section 54-3.2 of the Municipal Assessment Act to implement that reduction. So in this case, that would put the burden of proof on the applicant. So Mr. Badger, you are going to go first, but please allow us to find your brief before we continue. Does everybody have it?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Badger, when you're ready, please.
Okay. You got me forgot that I have to go first.
Yeah.
Anyways, so the subject property is 423 McMillan Avenue. It's located behind the intersection of Osborne Street and Confusion Court corner there. So it's right behind Osborne Street on McMillan. So it's about
Mr. Badger, would you mind reading in the roll number and the file number for the record, please?
The realty roll number is 12-021-241-000. The file number is 22788. This is for the 2023 assessment. I'm going to just mention that it's based on the evaluation as April 1st of 21. The type of property, this is a commercial, well, it's a commercial slash restaurant property. It's actually a billiard lounge with a small component for to serve some sort of bar food in there, but it's predominantly it's for billiard tables. I'd like to mention that the property sits on the property zoning is light manufacturing, so it's in zoned. It's in an area that's predominantly in behind it, and everything there is light manufacturing. It's off the main Osborne Strip, and it's in a high traffic area, but an area that doesn't lend itself for drop offs and such like that. So it's outside of the retail restaurant strip of Osborne Street. It's a single-story property. It's masonry construction. It was built in 1985. There were some improvements made to the property in the year around 2020, where they joined a couple buildings together and expanded slightly, which gives us the present square footage of about just over 7,540 square feet. It's been operated since 2020 as a billiard lounge. It used to be the Bar Club, and operations started in 2012. It was released to someone else. That particular party defaulted, and so the owners took back not the owners, but the previous tenant who had sold the business side of things, took back the property. He's currently operating it under the name of the Pulse. The leasehold improvements there are approximately 21 years old as of the reference year. There's limited parking. There's 12 stalls for the 7,000+ square feet of space in there. I did mention there is a limited commercial kitchen in there, but it's been operated as a billiard lounge. It's not operated as a restaurant. In terms of the workup, I did it based on the income approach. In terms of the workup, I might just go to my page 7. In terms of my workup there, I'm not disagreeing with some of the basic terms of the evaluation, such as the vacancy rate, the expense ratios, the capitalization rate used by the assessor. The only area that I have that I'm my argument is based on, or where I differ, is the lease rate that's been used for the property. The assessor, or the model driven rate, was $11.36 per square foot. My suggestion is that it should be the current lease is at $7, and I should say the current and the lease that was renewed in 2020 was at $7.16 per square foot. This property did go through same problems as restaurants and other recreational sort of venues. The COVID thing had really impacted its use during the last couple of years. I was talking to the owner who knows the operator. They've only achieved to pick up 50% of the pre-COVID area sales for the property. Based on the tough time there, the lease mentioned before was released in 2020, and the landlord agreed to renew it for a further 5 years at the the same rate that was previously used. So if you just go to my page 8, which is the quick evaluation model that I think everybody's used to seeing, the only thing that's different in terms of the numbers I'm plugged in is the $7.16. It gives me an income of $53,986. And if I apply the vacancy factor and I apply the operating expense and the shortfall rate, it gives me a net operating income of $46,058. Using the same capitalization rate of 7.25, it gives me a capitalization value for the property on the income approach of $635,000. So my recommendation is to accept the existing rate as the which provides evidence of the actual market rate for the property. I don't know if I'm jumping, but I did have a chance to review the assessor's comps that he used, his
Maybe,
analysis.
Mr. Badger, maybe we'll wait until we hear the assessor's evidence, and at that time you could question it, please.
Okay, that sounds good then.
Okay.
Okay, that ends my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Pontanilla, any questions on the appellant's evidence presented?
I do. So the rental rate, first off, I do want to say that for your information, did you have a conversation with the owner by any chance to come up with that information? Because I was looking through our records and we have no income and expense mailer from them for quite some time. So I actually had no idea what the performance of the property was. So did you have a conversation with the owner in regards to getting the actual rent being achieved, I guess?
Yes.
Okay. And so having had that, I would have had some more information to work with, but as such, I had no idea what the rental rate would be there. And so no comparables put in your brief. I see that you're kind of resting it on the just on the actuals of the performance of the property, correct?
That's correct. There's a limited number of comparables out there for billiard lounges for these amusement things. So it's really difficult to find a comparable. So my suggestion was the reason I used the market rate, well, the rate that they established at 2020.
Okay, that's good. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie, any questions?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
No questions at this time.
My question, Mr. Badger, is first of all, so this is a billiard hall. Is there a liquor license?
Yes.
Okay. And is there food served?
Yeah. Yes. I said there was it's a limited area where they prep food, like bar food, to serve to the clients who are playing the pool.
Kind of
hamburgers, French fries.
Okay, so short order kitchen. Would that be accurate? Okay. Thank you. And is there any income assigned to that at all in the valuation of the property?
I just used the rate right across the board.
Okay. All right. And it's addressed on McMillan, but yes, we're kind of South Donald, is that right? Where it hits Osborne, Confusion Corner?
I'm sorry. Well, it'd be, Osborne, I'm sorry, Donald takes that bend. So it's, well, Donald runs in, it's Coburn.
Oh,
it's just before it hits Confusion Corner.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you. All right. That's my only question. Excuse me. Mr. Pontanilla, please bear with us here. I'm going to pull up your docket or your brief, pardon me. Mr. Assessor, when you're ready, please, 423 McMillan Avenue.
Okay, so next on the docket, we do have file 22-788. Roll number is 1202-124-1000. The address is 423 McMillan Avenue. The 2023 assessed value had gone out at $1,034,000. So this property has been PUC'd or parcel use coded as a commercial CMRRE restaurant. We have 3 buildings associated with it. It's a 1-story building. And we have an effective year of 1985 and 2000 on it. So we do have 2 buildings, one older and one newer. The zoning is M1 manufacturing. That's correct, light manufacturing. The gross floor area we have is 7,540 square feet. And if I can direct your attention to page 2, I have included an image of the pad eye view of these subject properties so we can see its orientation there. And then I have included an overhead view of the subject property on page 3. On page 4, I do have a south-facing view and an east-facing view of the subject property. On page 5, I have included the Google Street View images. I've included 2 images. One would be of the 2021 map update showing the front, a face-on and a departing approach of the subject property itself. And then on page 6, I have included some images from behind the property showing the limited parking space that is associated. So I do want to acknowledge that. So we have not received any income and expense mailer for quite some time for the subject property. We don't have any sales history on the subject, and we have no lease information on the subject property itself. I have included a spread of comparable information on lease rates from within the neighborhood. So I tried to keep it tight from within Corydon, Osborne region itself there. And Academy, I have one comparable ad. And I will acknowledge the difficulty with finding an exact comparable, as you know, we don't necessarily have a billboard only, but there was 1 or 2 that I found were reasonable comparables to the subject property itself. So we do have on the income stream, we have a standard finished C2 restaurant, a C2 space at 7,540 square feet at $11.36 a square foot. We do have model parameters on there, so a 6% vacancy, 3% expense, and a $7 shortfall to bring us to a net operating income of $74,933. And then we have a modeled capitalization rate of 7.25%, which brings us to our overall value of $1,034,000. On the income value summary on page 10, we do have a summary of the valuation that I just spoke of. On page 11, we do have our cap rate information on there for the city of Winnipeg, as well as some of the other major players in the industry there. And then on page 12, we do have Municipal Assessment Act excerpts about the process. And then page 13, taking us to the end of the brief on page 23 is all the income and expense mailer information, which we have already gone over. And that is my presentation.
Thank you to the assessor. Mr. Badger, any questions on the assessor's evidence presented?
Yeah, just a few. First, I'm just going to act when it says the effective years built, 1985/2000. So that would indicate that the last improvements made would be in the year 2000.
That appears to be the case, correct?
Okay. So that would work out to the improvements being about 22 years old.
Correct.
You acknowledge it's in a manufacturing zone, notwithstanding it's an historic manufacturing zone. It's still surrounded by some manufacturing buildings in behind it and everything.
Yes, I do agree. I do acknowledge that, and that's the reason why I chose to include some pictures of the limited parking of the subject itself. It does have some challenges. That is correct.
Okay. If you take a look at your page 8, and I start talking about the comparables, I see the dates of the lease terms range from 1992 to 2019. These are 100% pre-COVID comparables.
That's correct. I had to use the market data that we have on hand.
Okay. And all these comparables are on neighborhood strip streets, like retail strip streets?
They're all within the neighborhood there, the Osborne Court and Academy area there. So we have some on Osborne Court and Academy. You know, given the limited section of commercial use that's going on right across the street and in the surrounding zone there, it was hard to get something that would be exactly, you know, on McMillan or something that I could point to. So, I mean, this is the information that we have for those types of property uses within the neighborhood.
Okay. And you'd say that I did look at the comparables, but the majority of them are all restaurants.
They are, that's correct.
Okay. So with a pool hall, with a limited bar serve, or limited, I should say, you know, bar food service, wouldn't dictate as such a high rate as these ones?
That's correct on some of them that you're looking at. There's other ones there that lead me pause to have some to do some reflection on. In particular, 108 Osborne Street that is being used in a somewhat similar manner, from my understanding, to what the subject is. And we have that at a $14.25 lease. And then also 681 Corden Avenue. It's not exactly how the subject is being used, but I mean, we don't really have, you know, exact billboard comparables that I can point and say that's exactly the same use. So we have to sort of go with some parameters, and, you know, it is a restaurant, you know, they play music, they have food that they offer, you know, so we have to have some overlap to try to make some comparables. So I would say 681 Corden, 108 Osborne Street, those seem to me to be pretty comparable to the subject, and they're both higher than what the model's valuing the subject at.
Okay. You said 108 Osborne. Yeah. Would you be surprised to find out that tenants, these are all leases, and there's been a default on those leases, both of them, for 108 in the year 2020?
I'm only looking at what we had on file for the market data.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, I'm unaware of that.
Okay. Would you be surprised if I would say approximately 4 or 5 of these tenancies have all left, that they're turnovers?
I can't verify, but if that's the case, I mean, you know, that would be eye-opening. I'd be curious to know if they've been turned over to new tenants, such as the nature of the restaurant game at times. But I don't have that information on file to be able to verify or deny that.
Yeah. Okay, I guess okay, sorry,
Take your time.
okay, those are basically my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Badger. Carrie, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, Mr. Pontanilla, did you have a chance to inspect this property?
I did a drive-by inspection. I had no communication with Mr. Badger or the owner itself, so I didn't have a chance to look inside, but I did a drive-by of the property.
Do you have any notes as to when it was last inspected?
I don't have that on file, I'm sorry, or on hand, sorry.
Because you've never, or you haven't, I don't know the length of time, but you did indicate that it's been some time that you've had a income and expense report from the owner.
Yeah, I can say what we have on file. This is verbal evidence. I didn't include it in my brief, but a verbal submission we haven't had, from my understanding or from what I looked at, since 2014. We haven't received any income and expense information for the subject. So that's why I was curious as to where Mr. Badger had got his information from, because I looked, and the earliest I had for something to work with was 2014, and we're in 2022 right now. Speaking of economic conditions as of April 1st, 2021, I didn't really know how much weight to put on the 2014 mailer, to be honest. And as Mr. Badger's alluded to as well, the subject has undergone several tenancy cycles since then as well. So I have no ability to know what the lease is commanding right now at that subject property.
Okay, so with that, would this compel you or one of your compatriots to contact them or go for?
Ideally, under ideal circumstances, if we had the ability to do that, I would say definitely that would have been a great aid in understanding more. But if you're speaking in relation to the appeal itself, we are under a quite heavy workload right now, but if you're speaking in
Yes.
general, if you are speaking in general, we do send them a mailer request every year. So regardless, they are receiving it. They have signed it. They've acknowledged that they received it. So they are aware of the process. They just aren't participating with us for whatever reason. And
Right.
that's something that we have to acknowledge as well. I am sympathetic to this particular property because it does have some challenges, as Mr. Badger had alluded to. I don't know if the rental rate is necessarily the best rental rate for the property itself. So I would look to that if that's something that you guys were looking at. But again, without having the information on file, I can't make any more comment than that. It's just sort of the opinion that I had reviewing the material. But again, I don't have the income and expense mailer to really point to a performance issue from what the model is predicting versus what the subject property is receiving.
Right. No, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mr. Pontilia.
You're
That's
welcome.
all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Carrie. Robert, any questions of the assessor?
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Pontilia, my first question is, I'm looking at the photos of the subject property on page 5. So the effective year built is as a result of a combination of 2 previous roll numbers, is that right?
I think there was actually an addition that was built at a certain point on the subject. So you can see, if you look on page 6 of my brief, you'll notice that there is what appears to be an addition that was built towards the rear of the property going out into the parking lot. I believe that's where the addition was, and that's what causes the effective age to have 2 ages, one for one side of the property, one for the other, and then a reconciliation in the middle.
Okay, so what is the actual considered year built?
I think the actual year built for one property is, if we go back to the start of the page, we have 2 there. We have 1954 on page 1. You can look at actual years built under property description.
Yeah.
We have 1954 as one, and then we have 2000 as the other. And then I believe the effective year is actually 1985, as it kind of falls in as a reconciliation between 54 and 2000.
Okay.
I believe that's how the model did it for that one.
Okay.
So that's as far as I understand how they put the effective year on it.
So it's 1985. Is that accurate?
I believe that's the reconciliation, correct?
Okay. And my second question is parking. From your photos, it looks like there's parking along page 6. Along, I guess that would be the Osborne East back lane coming off of we'll call it Donald South, and then there's parking along the back of the building also.
That's correct. So that's why I wanted to show that there is limited parking available. It's not as bleak as what it looks like when you examine the subject property from the McMillan vantage point of view.
Yeah,
that seems quite poor when you look at it from that perspective, but it's why I wanted to include this this extra photo evidence, just to show that there is, let's call it, limited parking. It's still not ideal for, a nightclub or a billiard. And again, I want to acknowledge that this subject does have challenges associated with it. I'm very conscientious of that, but with that being said, it does offer some parking on the property.
okay. Would it be accurate to say there's 6 along the lane and 6 across the rear of the property approximately?
Approximately, if that's what it looks like, I'd agree to that, correct?
And then parking out front would be restricted probably afternoon rush hour. Otherwise, there is parking available on, let's call it Donald Street South, the busy route.
Yeah, if you want to refer to that, sure. Yeah, that does appear to be the case that after the general times of rush hour and whatnot, that
Okay.
there is some limited parking in front from what I can tell. I could be wrong on that, but it does appear to be the case.
Yeah, okay. All right. And comparables, my last question would be page 8 of your comparable rents.
Yep.
You stated that 108 Osborne would be considered maybe not ideal, but your best comparable. Can you explain why that there was 108 and 681 Gordon? Can you explain?
I can bring up the document here if you just give me 1 second.
Of course.
So for market data, so we have, once again, I always have 3 criteria that I look for. I look for age, size, and then comparable use relative to the location of the subject property itself. And I kind of use those to guide my analysis and the comparables that I have included. So the comp that's most comparable in age, we have 1985 on the subject, is 681 Corden. They also have an effective age of 1985, and that's the Saffron's restaurant. So it is used in a restaurant fashion, but there's some nightclub qualities to it. I can attest to that personally. And that one we have on lease at $13.07 a square foot.
I'm sorry, which address was this? 681?
681 Corden, yeah. So that
Okay.
would be the comp most comparable in effective age, 1985. It's the same age as the subject property.
Okay.
And that one is achieving a rent of $13.07 a square foot. And then the second criteria would be the comp most comparable in size. So 7,540 square feet is the subject property. The biggest comp that we have in terms of size for the comparables I've included in my brief is 108 Osborne Street. That, from the time of use that I had for the market data, was being used as a nightclub as well. So that's why I said that that one could have some much more comparable qualities in terms of the comparables that I've included. I have a feeling that that one, in terms of its use and its type, has some similar. It's still not the same to the subject by any means, but it's similar. And that one achieves a rent of $14.25 at the time that this information was given in. If they have vacated the premise, I'm not aware of that right now, so I can't speak to that. But the information we have on file does point to a lease at the time of the economic conditions that it was in place, and that's at $14.25 a square foot. And so then for my third category, the comp most comparable in location and use, I would go to that one again, 108 Osborne Street, just because of its size, its location relative to the subject, and its use. So that to me seemed to be the most likely comparable that I would use as an indicator of what the performance of the property would be. But you know, with that being said, I don't want to be bullish on it and say that the rental rate that we have, again, I do want to be aware of the challenges that the property has. It's a unique property in that sense, in terms of its parking, its location. I mean, you know, this one is on Osborne as opposed to the one that's off the side on McMillan. So there are differences. It's not ideal, but it lends to show that maybe $11 might not be the worst rent, but if there was any adjustments on it, I wouldn't necessarily complain to that either.
Okay. Thank you for the explanation there. Okay.
You're welcome.
That is my only question. Mr. Badger, any requirement for summary at all? Maybe
Very,
for
very
any
quick.
information that was just brought up. I'm not sure if you want to comment on that, but
Just very quickly, okay?
Yes.
What I want to summarize the building location, okay? Light industrial. It's not on a popular retail strip like Academy Road or Corden or Osborne that was used. I'd also say that the building is old. I know the owners. They tend not to improve their buildings. So nothing has been done inside this since for 23 years. Okay, so it's still the same. They changed the sign in the front, but other than that, a little bit of paint here and there. There's been no updating in the building. In regards to the assessor's comps, the majority of them were restaurants, which I think unfairly shows the rental rates, in that the majority of them were 100% restaurant space, whereas this one has a limited area within the premises, no more than 300-400 square feet, for a small little kitchen to serve bar food. The assessor's comps. There's no other comps that are like a sports related type, place like a billiards lounge or a bowling alley. Sort of an example that would probably be a little bit closer to what the use of this building is and the way it's improved. And then the other thing too is the comps are all old. Like there's one comp in there in 1999. I believe that, I hope I'm not wrong there. This comps, but they're all pre-COVID. And we're living in the reference year, we're living in a new era for restaurants. I personally own a restaurant myself, so I know all the trials and tribulations of owning a restaurant during the COVID period here. And what was the evidence of the effects of the COVID? I actually contacted directly and checked all the comps, just so I have a little background knowledge. I would say at least half of the ones that were noted as restaurants have changed hands. Those leases have blown up because they've gone to the wayside. So I would suggest that using those as comparables, if it's failed, it really, to me, in my mind, doesn't indicate they're not perspective of the current economic conditions. Even that exercise area, the one on 108 he was talking about on Osborne Street, they failed too in their operations there too. The places that place has been sitting empty for a year to a year and a half. The landlord's trying to sell the place right now. It's up for sale, and he hasn't been able to release it at these rates that we use as comparables. So that summarizes. So I think the only evidence I have or a recommendation to be in the fair size is the actual rent that's being paid that was renegotiated right during the heart of the COVID period, which was the continuation of the old rent of I think it's $14.50 per $4,500 per month, which works out to $7.16 per square foot.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Badger. Mr. Pontanilla, any requirement for summary?
Well, I do find it interesting that Mr. Badger points out to my comparables. I would have loved to have pointed out to some of his if there was any in the brief. There was no comparables in the brief, so the market data isn't always accurate, or it isn't always perfect to the subject itself. There's always going to be differences in use, but with that being said, this is the data that we have. This is the market information that we have. 108 Osborne is just around the corner from where that subject property is, so he might want to point to the fact that it's empty, it's not being used. I don't know. I mean, those are all variables that have taken place since. I would say that, the rental rate, maybe it is coming in a little tight on it, but it's impossible to know when no one's giving us any information to work with. So with that being said, how can we really have any knowledge or understanding of it when we have nothing even to put our hats on? And I appreciate that Mr. Badger did come up with the information given to him by the client that he represents. But with that being said, we would like to have that information too. And perhaps, in the future, we would avoid any non-cooperation arguments and be able to come to a value that works for both of us. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you to both parties for your presentation, and you'll hear from us as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Badger, for appearing, Mr. Pontanillo.
Okay, I thank everybody for their patience and listening to the argument there. And I think the assessor has, I'm glad that he acknowledges and respects some of the problems with the property. Okay. Thank you very much. And bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a nice day.
That concludes item number 7, 423 McMillan Avenue. And we have heard all the items scheduled and this hearing is now adjourned.